Welcome to our deep dive on prayer. Something close to, I think, every Catholic's heart. We're going to explore the 9 levels of prayer. In Catholic spirituality, it's kind of like a roadmap to a deeper relationship with God. And you're probably here because you want to be a person of prayer and looking for some guidance. So let's unpack this.
Absolutely. It's such a beautiful framework for understanding how our prayer life can evolve and deepen over time.
And before we get lost in the details, it's not like these are rungs on a ladder or anything. Well, you reach one and then never look back.
Right.
It's a journey, and God leads each of us in a unique way.
Oh, totally. There's no need to compare yourself to others or feel pressured to reach the highest level quickly. It's all about allowing God to guide you at your own pace. Yeah.
So let's jump in to the first level, vocal prayer. This is like the foundation, the bedrock of our prayer lives, using words, spoken or recited, to connect with God. Familiar prayers like the Mass, the Rosary, Liturgy of the Hours. But even these familiar prayers, and this is where it gets interesting, I think, can become rote and lose their meaning.
Yeah, it's a common struggle, especially for those who've been praying these prayers for years, But vocal prayer isn't meant to be just mindless repetition. It's about engaging your entire being, body, mind, and soul, in a conversation with God.
I've heard people say that. Reciting the Rosary, can get monotonous. Do you have any tips for making even familiar vocal prayers feel fresh and engaging?
Absolutely. One technique is to focus on a different sense with each Hail Mary. So, for example, imagine the scent of the roses offered to Mary, or visualize the scene of the Annunciation, or feel the texture of the rosary beads in your hand. That can bring a whole other dimension to your prayer.
Well, that's brilliant. Engaging the senses can really bring those prayers to life.
Exactly. And remember, vocal prayer is the foundation upon which we build the rest of our prayer life.
Speaking of building, let's move on to level 2. Mental prayer, also known as meditation. Here's where we take things deeper. Actively reflecting on spiritual truths. I've always loved that quote from St. Teresa of Avila about mental prayer. Without mental prayer, she said, the soul is like a body paralyzed. It cannot walk.
Powerful image, isn't it? So true. Mental prayer is like exercise for our souls, helping us grow stronger and more resilient in our faith.
But for those of us with busy lives and, monkey minds, mental prayer can feel really daunting. You have any practical advice on how to get started?
St. Ignatius of Loyola's method is a fantastic starting point. Just find a quiet space. Choose a scripture passage and spend time reflecting on it. Ask yourself, what is God saying to me through these words? How does this apply to my life today?
I tried that, but I get so distracted. What do I do when my mind starts to wander?
That's normal. Don't get discouraged. Gently bring your attention back to the passage. You could also try using an image or a single word to focus your mind. Just be patient with yourself and keep practicing.
So we've laid the groundwork with vocal prayer. We've engaged our minds with mental prayer. Now it's time to move into the heart with level 3, effective prayer. This is like the bridge between meditation and contemplation, where our hearts take center stage. What makes effective prayer unique?
In effective prayer, we move beyond simply thinking about God to actually experiencing Him in our hearts. It's about responding to His presence with love, desire, and a deeper emotional connection.
So it's less about structured prayers and more about those spontaneous outpourings of the heart.
Exactly. It's where those short, heartfelt prayers, those acts of love, gratitude, contrition, trust, flow naturally from our hearts.
Like the Jesus prayer, Lord Jesus Christ, Son of God, have mercy on me, a sinner. Simple yet powerful.
Exactly. And it's fascinating that while effective prayer might seem less formal, it actually prepares us for those deeper levels of contemplation.
And that's where things start to shift a little bit.
Right.
Level 4, the prayer of simplicity, where we begin to enter the realm of contemplation.
Yeah. Think of it as a simple, loving gaze upon God, letting go of effort, distractions, and even words, and simply resting in God's presence.
I always loved what St. Francis de Sales said about this. He called it a simple, loving gaze upon divine things. It sounds so peaceful and effortless.
And that's where the challenge lies. For a lot of people, we're so used to doing in our prayer that simply being can feel uncomfortable or unproductive.
Yeah, I can imagine feeling like I'm not doing enough.
I know.
If I'm just being still and silent.
Yeah, that's a misconception. The prayer of simplicity isn't about emptying our minds. It's about shifting our focus from ourselves to God, allowing His presence to fill us. It's like finally taking a deep breath, after a long day and just letting go.
So less about achieving a state of emptiness and more about opening ourselves up to God's presence.
Exactly. And that openness leads us naturally to level 5, infused contemplation. This is where God takes over.
Ooh, that sounds a bit mysterious. Can you explain what you mean by God taking over?
So infused contemplation is a pure gift from God, something we can't achieve through our own efforts. He directly communicates himself to our souls, infusing us with knowledge and love. Imagine a direct line of communication with the divine.
Wow, that's amazing. But it also sounds a bit intimidating. What if I don't feel anything?
That's perfectly normal,
Oh.
especially at first. In fact, feelings of dryness or nothingness are quite common. It's like our souls are being purified, stripped of all that superficial, to make room for God's deeper presence.
So even the absence of feeling can be a sign of God's work in us. That's reassuring. It's about trusting the process.
Absolutely. Trust is so important. It becomes even more important as we move into level 6, the prayer of quiet. It's this incredible experience where our will is gently captivated by God.
So a deep sense of peace and surrender.
Exactly. St. Teresa of Avila described it as a deep and delightful peace in the will, a profound tranquility, where our desires align with God's will and we feel this incredible sense of harmony.
But even in that state of peace, can our minds still wander?
Yes, the intellect might still be active, but the focus of our attention has shifted. We're drawn to God's presence, like a moth to a flame, experiencing a sweetness that transcends ordinary emotions.
Wow, almost like a foretaste of heaven.
You could say that. The prayer of quiet is a true gift, a grace that prepares us for that even deeper union that awaits us in the unitive way.
And that's where we'll pick up in part 2 of our deep dive. But before we go, do you have any final thoughts for our listeners?
Who are eager to, cultivate a deeper prayer life, starting right now. Yeah, don't overthink it. Begin with what you know. Whether it's the rosary, a simple prayer of gratitude, or just a few moments of quiet reflection, the key is consistency. Even just a few minutes each day can make a world of difference. Trust that God will meet you where you are and guide you on that unique path to a richer, more fulfilling prayer life.
Those are beautiful words to end on. We'll continue our journey in part 2. Until then, God bless.
Welcome back to our deep dive into the 9 levels of prayer. As we move into this unitive way, we're entering a realm where prayer becomes less about techniques and more about a profound transformation of the soul.
Okay, I'm ready for this. So we left off talking about the prayer of quiet and how we experience this incredible peace, as our desires align with God's will. But what happens next? How do we move from that peaceful stillness to an even deeper union with God?
That's where level 7 comes in. The prayer of union. This is where we truly enter the unitive way, the final stage of the spiritual life. It's here that both our will and our intellect become completely captivated by God.
So it's like the prayer of quiet, amplified. Not just our will aligning with God's will, but our minds becoming totally absorbed in Him as well.
Exactly. Imagine that feeling of complete absorption you get when you're lost in a beautiful piece of music, or you're engrossed in a captivating book. Now magnify that 1,000-fold. And you're getting close to what the prayer of union feels like.
I'm trying to wrap my mind around that. Is it like time ceases to exist? Does the soul lose all desire for anything but God?
You're getting it. It's a profound experience of unity, a foretaste of the eternal union with God that we're all called to. And in this level, we really start to understand that prayer isn't just something we do, but it's becoming who we are.
That's powerful. Prayer transforming our very being. Okay, level 8, the conforming union. This is where things get a bit more intense, right?
Yeah.
This level of closeness to God, where the soul yearns for complete union. And that yearning is so intense that it can manifest in some pretty powerful ways.
Yeah, this is the level where some souls experience ecstasies, mystical wounds, even deep suffering because of that intense longing for God. It's like the heart is being stretched to its limits to make room for the immensity of God's love.
I can see how that could be both exhilarating and terrifying. I bet some listeners are thinking, wait, mystical wounds, ecstasies? That sounds a little out there.
I understand. These experiences can be hard to grasp, even for those who are, deeply rooted in the Catholic faith. It's important to remember, though, that God doesn't lead everyone this way. This is a specific path for certain souls, often those who are called to a deeper mystical union.
So it's not like everyone on the path to holiness will experience these dramatic mystical phenomena.
Exactly. The beauty of the spiritual life is that there are many paths to God. The key is to trust His guidance and surrender to his will, whether that leads you through these intense experiences or along a more gentle path.
Okay, that makes sense. So, to the peak, the summit of this spiritual mountain we've been climbing, level 9, the transforming union, also known as the mystical marriage. What can you tell us about this highest level of prayer?
Well, this is the ultimate goal, the culmination of the spiritual journey. It's where the soul is permanently united with God, living in this constant state of awareness of his presence. Imagine a love so profound that it transforms your very being. You become one with the beloved.
That is beautiful imagery, but I imagine it's a level that few reach in this life.
You're right. It's the reality of the great mystics, like St. Teresa of Avila and St. John of the Cross. But it's a state of being that is rarely achieved in its fullness while we're still here on this earth.
So like a distant star,
Yeah.
guiding us on our journey toward deeper union with God, a reminder of the incredible love that awaits us.
Precisely. It's something to aspire to. It reminds us that the journey doesn't end here. Even if we never fully experience the transforming union in this life, is the ultimate destination, the fulfillment of our deepest longing for God.
That is truly awe-inspiring. So we've covered all 9 levels, this roadmap to deeper prayer. But I know a lot of our listeners are probably thinking, okay, this is all fascinating, but how do I actually put this into practice? How do I become a person of prayer in my everyday life?
That's the million-dollar question. And the answer is both beautifully simple, yet profoundly challenging. It's about progress, not perfection. Starting where you are and allowing God to guide you step by step.
I like that. Progress, not perfection. Can we break that down a little bit more?
Yeah.
What are some practical steps people can take to move from simply knowing about the levels of prayer to actually experiencing them?
Absolutely. Remember the 3 stages of the spiritual life. We talked about the purgative way, the illuminative way, and the unitive way. Each stage offers specific practices and insights that can help you deepen your relationship with God.
Okay, let's start with that first stage, the purgative way, which encompasses those first 3 levels: vocal prayer, mental prayer, and effective prayer. This is all about laying the foundation.
For a vibrant prayer life?
Right.
Exactly. Think of it like building a solid base for a skyscraper. You need strong foundational stones of vocal prayer, the intricate scaffolding of mental prayer, and the brilliant stained glass windows of effective prayer to illuminate the whole structure with God's light.
I love that analogy. It makes it so clear that each level has its purpose, its own unique contribution to the overall structure.
It's during this stage that we focus on purifying our souls, turning away from sin, growing in virtue. We begin to create space for God in our lives, making prayer a non-negotiable part of our day.
So it's about forming those habits, those daily rhythms of connecting with God, even if it's just for a few minutes at a time.
Consistency is key. Even if you can only spare 5 or 10 minutes each day, commit to that time with God, whether it's reciting the rosary, reflecting on scripture, or simply offering a prayer of gratitude. Those small, consistent efforts are what build the foundation for deeper prayer.
So don't get discouraged if you feel like you're not making progress. Just keep showing up, keep putting in the effort, and trust that God is working in you.
And as you progress, you'll naturally move into the illuminative way, which includes levels 4 through 6, the prayer of simplicity, infused contemplation, and the prayer of quiet. This stage is all about learning to be still and receptive to God's presence.
So we've built the foundation, and now we're moving into the quiet sanctuary of the cathedral, so to speak.
You could say that. It's like moving from the bustling construction site into the stillness and peace of the sacred space.
And the key to this stage is interior silence.
Right.
Quieting our minds, letting go of all those distractions, and simply allowing ourselves to be present with God.
Exactly. Cultivating that sense of receptivity, that openness to God's presence. Remember that analogy of simply gazing upon God with love. That's what we're aiming for in this stage.
So we built the foundation, and now we're moving into the quiet sanctuary of the cathedral, so to speak.
Yeah, you could say that. It's like moving from the bustling construction site, into the stillness and peace of the sacred space.
And the key to this stage is interior silence.
Right.
Quieting our minds, letting go of all those distractions, and simply allowing ourselves to be present.
With God. Cultivating that sense of receptivity, that openness to God's presence. Remember that analogy we talked about of simply gazing upon God with love. That's what we're aiming for here in this stage.
It sounds simple, but I imagine it's harder than it seems. Our minds are constantly bombarded with thoughts, worries, to-do lists. How do we actually quiet all that noise?
Well, it's a practice. Like any skill, it takes time and patience, Find a quiet space, close your eyes, and just focus on your breath. When thoughts come up, just acknowledge them. Gently let them go. Don't engage with them. Just observe them as they pass by, like clouds in the sky.
That's a great tip, just detaching from those thoughts and allowing ourselves to be God's presence.
And the amazing thing is, as you surrender to that stillness, you'll naturally be drawn into the prayer of simplicity, that loving gaze upon divine things that St. Francis de Sales talked about.
And from there, it's a natural progression to infused contemplation, that pure gift from God where he directly communicates to our souls.
It's a mystery. It unfolds as we surrender to God's grace and allow him to work in us in ways we can't even imagine.
And of course, there's the prayer of quiet, that profound peace that comes when our will is completely captivated by God. Is there anything we can do to cultivate this, or is it purely a gift?
Like all the higher levels of prayer, it's ultimately a gift. But we can dispose ourselves to receive it by cultivating virtues like humility, surrender, and trust.
So it's about letting go of our need to control, to achieve, to do something in prayer, and simply allowing ourselves to be loved by God.
Exactly. And as we rest in that love, we'll begin to experience that deep peace and joy that the world can't give.
So we've covered vocal prayer, mental prayer. Let's talk about effective prayer. How do we cultivate those heartfelt expressions of love, gratitude, and contrition?
Well, effective prayer is often the most natural and spontaneous form of prayer. It flows from a heart that's in love with God. One way to cultivate this is to spend time reflecting on God's goodness and love in your life.
So it's about practicing gratitude, noticing those everyday blessings that we often take for granted.
Exactly. And don't be afraid to express those feelings to God. In your own words, pour out your heart to him. Share your joys, your sorrows, your hopes and fears. He wants a relationship with you, not just a recitation of memorized prayers.
That's really encouraging. So for those moving into the illuminative way, levels 4 through 6, where the focus shifts to contemplation and deeper union with God, what are some practical ways to navigate this?
This is where the practice of silence becomes so important. Find a quiet space each day where you can just be present with God without any agenda or expectations.
But isn't that a bit unrealistic to expect people, with busy lives, families, to carve out time for extended silence?
I understand it's a challenge, but even just a few minutes of intentional silence can make a world of difference. It's about creating those pockets of stillness in the midst of the busyness.
And what do we do during those times of silence? Just sit there and try to empty our minds.
It's not about emptying your mind, but more about shifting your focus from yourself to God. It's about listening with the ear of your heart, being receptive to those whispers of love and grace.
I love that image, listening with the ear of our hearts. It's so much more than just sitting in silence.
It is, and as you practice this attentive silence, you'll find yourself naturally drawn into the prayer of simplicity, that loving gaze that St. Francis de Sales talked about.
And from there we move into infused contemplation, that pure gift from God.
It's a mystery, but it unfolds as we surrender to God's grace.
Finally, let's talk about the unitive way, the final 3 levels. This is where the soul enters into an incredibly profound union with God. For many listeners, these levels seem almost unattainable, like the realm of saints and mystics. What encouragement can you offer?
It's true that few people reach the fullness of the unitive way in this life. But it's important to remember we're all called to this deep union with God. It's the goal of our spiritual journey.
So even if we never experience those, ecstasies of St. Teresa or the mystical visions of St. John of the Cross, we can still strive for that union with God in our everyday lives.
Absolutely. It's about making every moment, every encounter, every action an offering of love to God, seeing his presence in all things, and responding with a heart full of gratitude and surrender.
That's a beautiful challenge, and one that I think will resonate with our listeners. So as we wrap up this deep dive into the 9 levels of prayer, what's that final thought-provoking question or insight that might spark something in our listeners' hearts?
Here's something to ponder. Imagine if prayer wasn't just something you did, but a way of being. What would your life look like if you lived every moment in conscious awareness of God's presence?
Wow. That's a powerful question. It challenges us to see prayer, not as a separate compartment of our lives, but as, the very air we breathe,
Yeah.
the lens through which we see everything.
And as we cultivate that awareness, as we allow God's love to permeate every aspect of our being, we begin to experience the transformative power of prayer in ways we never thought possible.
Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and insights with us. I know our listeners will come away from this deep dive with a renewed appreciation for the beauty and the power of prayer.
It's been a joy to explore this topic with you. Remember, the journey to deeper prayer is an adventure, and God is with you every step of the way.